The blizzard hit Montrose, Colorado, with a fury that would be remembered for generations, and Franklin Frost knew he should have stayed at the ranch house instead of riding out to check the northern fence line. But stubbornness ran deeper than common sense in his family. The wind howled like a pack of wolves as he urged his horse through the knee-deep snow, squinting against the white curtain that had descended over the February landscape of 1878. His fingers had gone numb inside his leather gloves, and ice crystals clung to his beard, but he pressed on, knowing the cattle needed those fences secure, or they would scatter across half the territory. He was nearly back to the main road when he saw her. A dark shape collapsed against a bare cottonwood tree, barely visible through the swirling snow. Franklin pulled hard on the reins, his heart lurching in his chest as he realized it was a woman, her thin dress and shawl completely inadequate for the brutal cold. He dismounted quickly, his boots crunching through the icy crust as he rushed to her side. She was crying, her whole body shaking with sobs and shivers, her lips tinged blue and her dark hair matted with snow. "Madam," he said urgently, kneeling beside her and placing a hand on her shoulder. "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened, and even through her tears and the confusion of hypothermia, he could see they were a striking green like spring grass after rain. She tried to speak, but her teeth chattered so violently the words would not come. Franklin did not waste time with more questions. He stripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her, then lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and he wondered how long she had been out here, how far she had walked in this deadly storm. "Come inside," he said, though his ranch house was still a good mile away. "I will keep you warm tonight. I promise you that." She pressed her face against his chest, still crying, and he felt the dampness of her tears soak through his shirt even as he settled her onto his horse and climbed up behind her. He held her tight against him with one arm while guiding the horse with the other, letting the animal find its own way home through the familiar territory. The ride felt endless, each minute a battle against the wind and cold, but finally the dark shape of his ranch house emerged from the white chaos. Franklin had built the place himself over the past 3 years, a solid structure of timber and stone with a good fireplace and thick walls to keep out the mountain winter. He had inherited the land from his father, who had died of pneumonia 2 winters back, and had worked it alone ever since. Now, as he carried the half-frozen woman up the steps to his porch, he was grateful for the solitude, for the privacy to help this stranger without prying eyes and gossiping tongues. He kicked the door open and brought her straight to the fireplace, laying her on the bearskin rug his mother had insisted he keep before she had moved to live with his sister in Denver. The fire had burned down to coals, but he built it up quickly, adding logs until flames roared and heat began to fill the room. The woman had stopped crying, but she still shook violently, her skin pale as death. Franklin knew what had to be done, though propriety screamed against it. He had seen men die of exposure, had watched the cold take his uncle when he was just a boy. Wet clothes would kill her as surely as leaving her in the snow. He moved to his bedroom and grabbed every blanket he owned, then returned to find her trying to sit up, her movements clumsy and weak. "Madam, your clothes are wet through. You need to get out of them or you will not make it through the night." He kept his voice gentle but firm. "I will turn my back and get you something dry to wear. Can you manage?" She nodded, though he doubted she truly could. He found one of his flannel shirts and a pair of wool socks, leaving them within her reach before turning to face the wall. He heard the rustle of wet fabric, heard her struggling, heard a small cry of frustration. Without turning around, he said, "I am going to make you something hot to drink." There is a screen in the corner if you want to use it for privacy." He busied himself at the stove, heating water for coffee and warming some of the beef stew he had made the day before. When he finally heard her say, "You can turn around now," he found her wrapped in his largest blanket, his shirt hanging loose on her small frame, her wet dress and undergarments spread near the fire. She sat with her knees drawn up, still shivering but with more awareness in her eyes. Franklin brought her the coffee first, wrapping her hands around the warm tin cup. "Drink slowly," he instructed. "Your body needs to warm from the inside." She took a sip and closed her eyes, and he saw a tear slide down her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You saved my life." "What were you doing out there?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Where did you come from?" Her hands trembled around the cup. "I was on the stage from our Ray. We hit something on the road, a fallen tree, I think, and the wheel broke. The driver said we would have to wait while he rode to town for help. But then the storm got worse, and the other passengers started arguing, and She swallowed hard. "I just needed to get away. I started walking, thinking I would find shelter, but everything looked the same. I got lost." "The stage road is 5 miles from here," Franklin said, trying to keep the alarm from his voice. "You walked 5 miles in that storm." "I did not mean to. I did not know where I was going." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I thought I was going to die. I sat down under that tree and I could not get back up. My sister always said I made foolish decisions, and she was right. She was right about everything." Franklin leaned forward. "You are alive. That is what matters now. What is your name?" "Louisa," she said quietly. "Louisa Carter. I am. I was traveling to Grand Junction to meet my intended." The last word hit Franklin like a stone, though he had no right to feel anything about it. "Your intended?" "A man I have never met. My brother-in-law arranged it. He is a banker in Grand Junction, wealthy and respectable." "Everything my sister said I should want." Her voice cracked. "Everything I do not want at all." Franklin stood and fetched the bowl of stew, handing it to her with a spoon. "Eat this. Then you should rest. The storm will not break before morning, and you need to get your strength back." She ate obediently, and he watched the color slowly return to her face as the hot food and the warmth of the fire did their work. When she finished, she looked up at him with those remarkable green eyes. "I do not even know your name." "Franklin Frost. Most people call me Frank. This is my ranch about 3 miles outside Montrose proper." "Frank Frost," she repeated, and somehow his name sounded different in her voice, softer and more intimate than he had ever heard it. "That is a strong name." He felt heat rise to his face that had nothing to do with the fire. "It is just a name. Let me get you set up in my bed. I will take the floor out here." "I cannot take your bed," she protested, but her exhaustion was evident in every line of her body. "You can and you will. You need proper rest, and that floor is no place for someone recovering from exposure." He stood and offered his hand. "Come on. You can barely keep your eyes open." She let him help her up, and he was acutely aware of how small her hand felt in his, how the blanket had slipped enough to show the curve of her neck. He led her to his bedroom, which was simple but clean, with a sturdy bed frame he had built himself and a quilt his mother had sewn. Louisa sat on the edge of the mattress, looking lost and young and impossibly vulnerable. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked softly. "You do not know anything about me." Franklin met her gaze steadily. "Because you needed help and I was there to give it. That is reason enough." She studied his face for a long moment, and he wondered what she saw there. Not everyone would think so. Then not everyone is worth knowing. He backed toward the door. "Sleep now. We will figure everything else out in the morning." But sleep was hard to come by that night. Franklin lay on the floor by the fire, wrapped in a spare blanket that barely kept the cold at bay, and listened to the wind howl around the house. He kept thinking about Louisa in his bed, about her tears in the snow, about the way she had said she did not want to meet her intended. It was none of his business. She was a woman passing through, caught in a storm, nothing more. By tomorrow or the next day she would be gone, continuing on to Grand Junction and her respectable banker. The thought bothered him more than it should. When dawn came, gray and cold but blessedly clear, Franklin rose and started breakfast. He was frying eggs and bacon when he heard the bedroom door open. Louisa emerged, still wearing his shirt and wrapped in the blanket, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. In the morning light, he could see her more clearly. She was beautiful, not in the flashy way of saloon girls but in a quieter, deeper way. She had a heart-shaped face, a small nose and full lips that looked like they smiled often, though she had not smiled once since he found her. "Good morning," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "How do you feel? Sore, tired, but alive thanks to you." She moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. It stopped snowing. The worst of it has passed. But there is still at least 2 feet on the ground, maybe more in the drifts. It will be a few days before the roads are passable. He plated the food and brought it to the small table. "Sit. Eat. You need to keep your strength up." They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Franklin searched for something to say. He was not used to conversation, especially not with women. His life was cattle and horses and solitude, but Louisa was not like anyone he had encountered before. There was a sadness in her eyes that matched something in his own soul, a sense of being adrift that he recognized all too well. "Tell me about this man in Grand Junction," he said finally. "The one you are supposed to marry." Louisa set down her fork. "His name is Harold Pemberton. He owns the largest bank in Grand Junction and half the businesses on Main Street. He is 42 years old and looking for a wife to manage his household and give him children. My sister's husband wrote to him about me after my parents died last year. I have been living with them in our array, and my sister made it clear I was a burden. So when Mr. Pemberton wrote back saying he would consider a match, she was thrilled. She bought my stage ticket and sent me off with her blessing and her warnings. That I should be grateful. That I should do whatever makes him happy. That I should not expect love or companionship, just security and respectability." Louisa's voice was bitter. "She said I was too old to be choosy. I am 23, you see, practically a spinster." Franklin nearly choked on his coffee. 23 is not old. My sister was married at 18. She has 3 children and a proper place in society. She thinks I wasted my youth reading books and avoiding suitors." Louisa looked at him, and there was a spark of defiance in her eyes now. She was right about the books, at least. "I would rather read about adventures than have the ones she thinks are appropriate." "What kind of adventures?" Franklin asked, genuinely curious. "Traveling. Seeing places beyond the next town. Meeting people who are different from me. Maybe learning to do something useful with my hands instead of just embroidery and piano." She laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "Foolish dreams for a woman with no money and no prospects. I do not think they are foolish." Franklin surprised himself with the intensity of his own words. "I think too many people settle for what they are told to want instead of figuring out what would actually make them happy." Louisa's eyes widened. "You understand." "Maybe I do." The moment stretched between them, fragile and tentative, until Franklin cleared his throat and stood to gather the dishes. "Your dress is dry. I put it in the bedroom last night once the fire had done its work. You should rest more today. The cold takes a lot out of a person. What will you do?" "Check on the stock. Make sure the animals weathered the storm. Normal ranch work." He paused at the door. "You will be safe here. I will be back by midday to fix lunch." Outside, the world was transformed into a pristine white landscape that hurt his eyes with its brightness. Franklin trudged through the snow to the barn, where his 2 horses and small herd of cattle had taken shelter. He fed them and checked their water, working mechanically while his mind churned with thoughts of Louisa. He had no business thinking about her the way he was. She was engaged, or as good as engaged, to another man. She was educated and refined, probably used to niceties he could never provide. She would leave as soon as the roads cleared and he would go back to his solitary life. That was how it had to be. But when he returned to the house at noon, his heart lifted at the sight of her sitting by the fire, dressed now in her own clothes, reading one of the 3 books he owned. She looked up as he entered, and she smiled for the first time, and Franklin felt something in his chest crack open. "I hope you do not mind," she said, holding up the book. "You have a copy of 2 Years Before the Mast. I have wanted to read it for years, but my sister said it was not appropriate for ladies. It is a good book, one of my favorites." He shed his coat and boots, brushing snow from his clothes. "Keep reading. I will make us something to eat." They fell into an easy rhythm over the next few days. The roads remained impassable, blocked by snow and fallen trees, and Franklin made no effort to hurry the process of clearing a path to town. Each morning he did his chores while Louisa tidied the house and prepared simple meals from his pantry supplies. Each afternoon they sat by the fire and talked, really talked, in a way Franklin had not done with anyone since his father died. She told him about growing up in St. Louis, the daughter of a lawyer who had moved west for his health, only to die of consumption anyway. She told him about her mother, who had followed her husband to the grave within 6 months, leaving Louisa and her older sister as orphans. She told him about the books she had read, the places she dreamed of seeing, the life she had imagined before reality closed in. He told her about the ranch, about building it with his own hands from the ground up. He told her about his mother and sister, about his father's dreams for this land. He told her about the loneliness of the work, the satisfaction of seeing cattle thrive, the peace he found in the mountains even when the isolation threatened to swallow him whole. "You ever think about marrying?" Louisa asked on the 3rd evening, her voice soft in the firelight. "Having a family," Franklin stared into the flames. "I thought about it, but women are scarce out here and the ones who are available want a man with money or status or charm. I have land and livestock and not much else. Most women take one look at this place and realize how hard the life would be." "It does not seem hard to me. It seems honest." Louisa pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "There is something to be said for knowing what each day will bring, for working with your hands and seeing the results of your labor. You say that now, after 3 days. But winters here are brutal. Summers can be just as bad, hot and dry with constant worry about water. It is not the life you were raised for. The life I was raised for ended when my parents died." She looked at him directly, and there was something fierce in her expression. "The life my sister wants for me is a different kind of death. At least here I can see the sky." Franklin's heart hammered in his chest. "Louisa, I know," she interrupted. "I know I am supposed to go to Grand Junction. I know I am supposed to marry Mr. Pemberton and be grateful for the opportunity. But Frank, I do not think I can do it. These past few days, talking with you, being here, I feel more alive than I have felt in years. How can I go back to being the proper, grateful woman everyone expects?" He wanted to tell her to stay. The words burned in his throat, demanding to be spoken, but he forced them down. "You deserve more than a half-frozen death in the snow and a lonely ranch house. You deserve books and music and people who appreciate your mind. You deserve to be happy." "What if I told you that I think I could be happy here?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "What if I said that the past 3 days have shown me what I actually want, and it is not a banker's mansion in Grand Junction." Franklin stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "You do not know what you are saying. You have been through a trauma. You are confused and scared, and I am the first person who has shown you kindness. That is not the same as wanting this life. Do not tell me what I feel." Louisa rose as well, and there was anger in her voice now. "Do not presume to know my mind better than I do. I am not a child, and I am not confused. I am telling you that I would rather face 100 blizzards with you than spend one comfortable night with a man I do not know and cannot love." He turned to face her, and the look in her eyes nearly undid him. "And what about me? What if I want more for you than this? What if I told you that I am falling in love with you?" The words hung in the air between them, impossible and true. "What if I said that I look at you and see everything I have been searching for without even knowing I was searching?" Franklin closed the distance between them in 3 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Then I would say that I have been half in love with you since I found you crying in the snow. I would say that every minute you have been here has felt like coming home to something I never knew I was missing. I would say that the thought of you leaving tears me apart." "Then do not let me leave," she whispered. "Ask me to stay." He kissed her instead, a gentle press of lips that tasted of coffee and hope. She melted against him, her arms wrapping around his neck, and the kiss deepened into something that made his head spin. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Franklin rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he said hoarsely. "Stay with me. Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to be here, because we could build something real together." "Yes," Louisa breathed. "Yes, I will stay. I want to stay." They stood there, holding each other in the firelight, and Franklin felt the last walls around his heart crumble. But even as joy flooded through him, reality crept in with cold fingers. "There will be talk. People will assume things. And you are still expected in Grand Junction. Your sister will make trouble. Let them talk. Let my sister rage. I am tired of living for other people's expectations." Louisa pulled back enough to look at him. "But Frank, I do not want to bring shame on you. We should marry, and soon, before anyone can cast doubt on my reputation or yours." "Are you sure? This is fast, Louisa. We have known each other less than a week." She smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "My parents met on a Monday and were engaged by Friday. They had 30 good years together before the illness took them. Sometimes you just know. Do you not feel it too?" He did. God help him, he did. "Then we will go to town as soon as the roads are clear. We will speak to the preacher and make this right." The roads cleared 2 days later, though travel was still difficult through the packed snow. Franklin hitched his horse to his small wagon, and they rode into Montrose together, Louisa bundled in every spare piece of warm clothing he could find. The town was small but growing, a collection of buildings clustered around a main street with the promise of more expansion as the railroad pushed closer. Their first stop was the telegraph office, where Louisa composed 2 messages. One to her sister in Auray, informing her that she would not be continuing to Grand Junction and was no longer in need of her matchmaking services. The second to Harold Pemberton himself, apologizing for the inconvenience and wishing him well in his search for a wife. Franklin watched her hands shake as she wrote, but her expression remained determined. "My sister will be furious," Louisa said as they left the telegraph office. "She will say I have ruined myself." "You have saved yourself," Franklin corrected. "There is a difference." The preacher's house was on the edge of town, a neat white building with a cross mounted above the door. Reverend Thomas was a kind-faced man in his 50s who listened to their story with patience and only mild surprise. When Franklin asked if he would marry them, the Reverend studied them both carefully. "I do not doubt your sincerity," he said slowly, but marriage is a sacred covenant not to be entered into lightly. Miss Carter, you are certain this is what you want. You have family who might object. My only family is a sister who sees me as a burden and a brother-in-law who sees me as a bargaining chip. This is my choice, made freely and with full understanding. Louisa's voice was steady. I love Frank and I want to be his wife. The Reverend turned to Franklin. And you, son? You understand the responsibility you are taking on. I do, sir. I will provide for her and protect her and honor her all the days of my life. Franklin took Louisa's hand. She is the best thing that ever happened to me. Reverend Thomas smiled. Then I will marry you with my blessing and the Lord's. But given the unusual circumstances, I think we should wait at least a week. Use that time to be certain, both of you. If you still feel the same way come next Sunday, we will have the ceremony after morning service. They agreed, though Franklin could see the worry in Louisa's eyes as they left. He thinks we will change our minds, she said. He wants to give us the chance to, in case we need it. That is not unreasonable. Franklin helped her into the wagon, but I will not change my mind, will you? Never. She squeezed his hand. A week will go by fast. We should use it to prepare. The week did go by fast, filled with practical preparations that made their coming union feel increasingly real. Franklin took Louisa to the general store where she marveled at the selection, and he insisted on buying fabric for new dresses, sturdy boots for ranch work, and supplies to expand his limited pantry. She protested the expense, but he waved away her concerns. You are going to be my wife. Let me provide for you properly. They spent time at the ranch making space for her belongings, few as they were. Franklin built shelves in the bedroom for the books she hoped to acquire, and Louisa reorganized his kitchen with an efficiency that made cooking easier for both of them. They worked side by side, and in the evenings they sat by the fire and talked about their future. I want to learn to ride properly, Louisa announced one night. Not just sitting politely on a gentle horse, but really riding. I want to be able to help you with the ranch work. It is hard work, Franklin warned. Cattle can be stubborn and dangerous. The weather is unpredictable. There will be days when you are exhausted and sore and wondering why you ever agreed to this. And there will be days when I watch the sunrise over the mountains with you beside me, and I will know exactly why. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Teach me, Frank. Let me be your partner in all of this, not just a woman you rescued from the snow. He kissed the top of her head. You were never just that. On Sunday morning, they dressed in their best clothes and rode to town together. Word had spread, as word always did in small communities, and the church was fuller than usual with curious onlookers. Franklin felt Louisa tense beside him as they walked down the aisle, but she kept her chin high and her hand steady in his. Reverend Thomas conducted a simple but beautiful ceremony, speaking of love and commitment and the courage it took to build a life together in the wilderness. When it came time for vows, Franklin spoke from his heart. Louisa, I promise to stand by you in joy and in hardship. I promise to value your mind and your spirit as much as I cherish your presence. I promise to work every day to be worthy of the trust you have placed in me. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. Tears streamed down Louisa's face, but her voice was clear when she responded. Frank, I promise to be your partner in all things. I promise to bring laughter and light to your days. I promise to face whatever comes with courage and with you at my side. I will love you with everything I am, for all the days of my life. They exchanged simple gold bands that Franklin had purchased from the jeweler in town. And when Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Franklin kissed his bride with a tenderness that made several women in the congregation sigh audibly. After the service, people approached them with varying degrees of warmth. Some were genuinely happy, offering congratulations and well wishes. Others were clearly skeptical, their eyes judging Louisa's too-quick marriage and Franklin's presumption in wedding a woman above his station. But there were also a few people who surprised them. "I think you are a lucky man, Frank Frost," said Martha Henderson, the schoolteacher. "Any woman brave enough to choose her own path will make a fine pioneer wife." "You bring her by the school sometime," added Samuel Morrison, who owned the largest ranch in the county. "My wife could use another educated woman to talk to. Gets lonely out here for the ladies sometimes." The support meant more than Franklin could express, but it was the ride home, just the two of them in the wagon with their shadows stretching long in the afternoon sun, that felt like the real beginning. Louisa was his wife now. She had chosen him, and he had chosen her, and whatever came next they would face together. That night, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Louisa traced patterns on Franklin's chest and whispered, "I never knew it could be like this. I never knew I could feel so completely myself while being so completely part of someone else." "Neither did I," Franklin admitted. "I thought I was content with my solitary life. But this, with you, is better than content. This is happy." The first months of their marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Louisa threw herself into learning ranch life with an enthusiasm that both delighted and worried Franklin. She insisted on helping with the morning chores, feeding chickens and collecting eggs, mucking out stalls and hauling water. He taught her to ride astride instead of side saddle, and she proved to be a natural horsewoman, quickly bonding with a gentle mare he had acquired specifically for her use. She learned to mend fences, to recognize the signs of illness in cattle, to judge the weather by the behavior of animals and the color of the sky. Her hands, once soft and pale, became work roughened and tan. She learned to shoot, both rifle and pistol, because Franklin insisted she needed to be able to protect herself when he was away from the ranch house. "There are mountain lions and bears in these parts," he explained, teaching her to aim and fire. "And sometimes men more dangerous than either. I need to know you can defend yourself." Louisa proved to be a decent shot, though she confessed she hoped never to have to use the skill in earnest. But she appreciated his concern and his willingness to teach her, to treat her as a true partner rather than a delicate ornament to be protected and sheltered. In turn, she brought changes to the ranch that improved their quality of life. She planted a vegetable garden near the house, coaxing tomatoes and beans and squash from the rocky soil. She made curtains for the windows and braided rugs for the floors. She organized his chaotic collection of tools and supplies, creating systems that made work more efficient. But more than the practical changes, she brought joy to Franklin's days. She sang while she worked, old folk songs and church hymns that filled the house with music. She read to him in the evenings, everything from Shakespeare to dime novels, her voice bringing stories to life. She laughed easily and often, finding humor in the small disasters that were part of ranch life. 3 months into their marriage, Louisa's sister arrived unannounced, accompanied by her tight-lipped husband. Franklin was out checking the herd when their buggy pulled up to the house, and he came riding back fast when one of the ranch hands alerted him to visitors. He found Louisa standing on the porch, her arms crossed and her expression set, while a woman who could only be her sister berated her in a shrill voice. "You have made yourself a laughingstock," the sister was saying. "Running off with some cowboy, refusing a proper match, living out here like a common farmhand. What would Mother and Father say?" "Mother and Father would want me to be happy," Louisa replied, her voice cold. "Which is more than I can say for you, Dorothy. Dorothy's face flushed an ugly red. Happy? You think this is happiness? Wait until the novelty wears off and you realize what you have done. You could have been a respectable woman with a fine house and servants and a place in society. Instead, you are here, scrubbing floors and smelling like animals. I would rather smell like honest work than be perfumed and miserable. Louisa's eyes flashed. Why are you even here, Dorothy? To gloat? To tell me you were right about me being a foolish girl? I came to offer you one last chance. Dorothy's husband finally spoke, his voice pompous and grating. Mr. Pemberton is willing to overlook your indiscretion if you return with us now. He is a forgiving man, and he understands that women sometimes have hysterical episodes. Franklin had heard enough. He dismounted and strode to the porch, placing himself firmly beside Louisa. My wife is not having a hysterical episode. She made a choice, and it is not your place to question it. Dorothy looked him up and down with obvious disdain. So you are the cowboy who stole my sister. I hope you are proud of yourself, taking advantage of a woman in distress. I saved your sister from freezing to death, and then I married her because we fell in love. If you cannot be happy for her, then you should leave. Franklin kept his voice level, but there was steel beneath the words. You will regret this, Dorothy hissed, turning her venom on Louisa. When you are old and worn out, when you have nothing to show for your life but calloused hands and broken dreams, remember that you chose this. I will remember that I chose love over obligation. I will remember that I chose a man who values me over one who wanted a housekeeper he could bed. And I will remember that my sister cared more about appearances than about my happiness. Louisa's voice shook, but she did not back down. Now please leave. You are not welcome here. Dorothy and her husband departed in a storm of indignation, and Franklin pulled Louisa into his arms as soon as their buggy disappeared down the road. She was trembling, and he felt dampness on his shirt where her face pressed against his chest. I am sorry, he murmured. I am sorry your family is not supportive. You are my family now, Louisa said fiercely. You and this ranch and the life we are building, that is all I need. But he could tell the encounter had shaken her, and that night she was quieter than usual. Franklin made her favorite meal and held her close by the fire, and eventually she began to talk. Do you ever worry that she might be right, that I will regret this choice? Do you regret it now? He asked. Not even a little bit. But what if someday I do? What if you wake up one morning and realize you are tied to a woman who cannot even properly churn butter? Franklin tilted her face up to meet his eyes. Louisa, I do not care if you ever learn to churn butter. I care that you are brave and kind and smart. I care that you make me laugh. I care that you chose this life, not because you had no other options, but because you wanted it. That is worth more than all the proper society manners in the world. She kissed him then, deep and desperate, and he carried her to bed and showed her with his body what words could not fully express. Afterward, tangled in the sheets, she whispered, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. I love you just as much, he promised. And I will keep loving you, butter or no butter. She laughed, the sound bright and genuine, and Franklin felt the last of her doubts dissolve. Summer came, hot and dry, and they worked together to keep the cattle watered and the garden alive. Louisa proved invaluable during the branding season, keeping track of numbers and helping to treat injuries. She had a gentle touch with the animals, and a head for organization that made the whole operation run more smoothly than it ever had when Franklin worked alone. They made friends in town, slowly becoming part of the community. Martha Henderson did indeed invite them for dinner, and her husband turned out to be a physician who gave Franklin useful advice about managing minor injuries and illnesses in such an isolated location. Samuel Morrison and his wife became regular visitors, sharing news and gossip and occasionally helping out during busy seasons. "You have done well for yourself, Frank," Samuel said one evening, watching Louisa laugh at something Martha had said. "That wife of yours has more grit than half the men in the county." Franklin felt a surge of pride. "She is remarkable. Hold onto her tight. Good women are rarer than gold out here." He did hold on to her, cherishing every day they had together. They fell into rhythms and routines that felt like home. Morning coffee shared on the porch, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. Evenings by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. Nights tangled together, learning the landscape of each other's bodies and hearts. In early autumn, Louisa began feeling unwell. She was tired all the time and nauseous in the mornings, and Franklin worried that she had caught some illness. But when Martha Henderson visited and Louisa confided in her, Martha smiled knowingly. "You are not sick, dear. You are pregnant." The words hit Franklin like a thunderbolt. A baby. They were going to have a baby. He looked at Louisa, saw the wonder and fear mingled in her expression, and felt his own emotions mirror hers. "Are you sure?" Louisa asked Martha. "Quite sure. I have had 3 of my own. I know the signs." Martha patted Louisa's hand. "You should see Dr. Henderson for confirmation, but I would wager my best hat on it." After Martha left, Franklin and Louisa sat together in stunned silence. Finally, Louisa said, "Are you happy?" "I am terrified," Franklin admitted. "But yes, I am happy." "Are you?" "I am terrified too, but also excited. We are going to be parents, Frank. We are going to have a family." He pulled her close, resting his hand on her still, flat belly. "We will figure it out together. Everything else we have figured out together." The pregnancy changed things, though not in the ways Franklin expected. Louisa remained determined to help with ranch work, though he finally put his foot down when he caught her trying to lift a heavy feed sack in her 4th month. "You are going to hurt yourself or the baby," he said, taking the sack from her. "Let me handle the heavy work from now on." "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she argued, but there was no real heat in it. She was tired more often now, and he could see that she was struggling to do everything she had been doing before. They compromised. She continued with the lighter chores and took over more of the household management, while he hired a young man from town to help with the heavier ranch work. It cost money they could barely spare, but Franklin's herd was growing and the cattle prices were good. They would manage. Winter came again, and Franklin thought about the night he had found Louisa in the snow, how different his life had been just a year ago. Now he had a wife he adored and a child on the way. The house that had felt empty and cold was warm with life and love. He had never been happier, and sometimes the intensity of that happiness scared him. What if something goes wrong? He asked Louisa one night as they lay in bed, his hand on her swollen belly. "Women die in childbirth. Babies die. What if I lose you? You will not lose me. I am stronger than I look." She covered his hand with hers. "But Frank, if something does happen, you have to promise me you will be all right. Promise me you will live, not just survive. Do not talk like that. Nothing is going to happen. Promise me anyway." He promised, though the words felt like ashes in his mouth. But Louisa proved stronger than even she knew. When her labor began on a cold February morning, Franklin rode for Dr. Henderson while Martha Henderson stayed with Louisa. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Franklin genuinely thought he might lose his mind from fear. But when he finally heard the cry of his newborn son, when he saw Louisa exhausted but smiling and holding their baby, relief washed over him so powerfully his knees went weak. "A boy," Louisa whispered, her face radiant despite her obvious exhaustion. "We have a son, Frank." Franklin knelt beside the bed, touching the baby's impossibly tiny hand with one finger. He is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe this is real." They named him William after Franklin's father and called him Will from the start. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. Franklin had never known love like what he felt for his son, a fierce, protective instinct that made him understand why men fought so hard to build legacies. Louisa took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. She nursed Will and sang to him and read to him even when he was too young to understand the words. Franklin would often find her in the rocking chair by the fire, the baby in her arms and a book propped open on her knee, reading aloud while Will dozed. "You are going to give him a love of stories," Franklin said, watching them with a soft smile. "I hope so. I want him to know that there is a whole world out there, even if we are here in this one corner of it." Louisa looked up from the book. "I want him to have choices, Frank. I want him to never feel trapped the way I felt before I met you. He will have choices. We will make sure of it." The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. Will grew from infant to toddler to a sturdy little boy who followed his father everywhere, asking endless questions about the ranch and the animals and the mountains. Louisa continued to be Franklin's partner in running the ranch, and together they built it into a thriving operation that earned respect throughout the county. When Will was 3, Louisa became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier. Their daughter was born in the spring, with her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes. They named her Grace, and she was a quiet, observant baby who seemed to take in everything around her with solemn consideration. "She is going to be the smart one," Martha Henderson predicted, visiting to help with the new baby. "Will has his father's practicality, but Grace has her mother's mind." "They are both smart," Louisa said, but she smiled as she cradled Grace. "But yes, I think she will be a reader like me." Franklin stood in the doorway, watching his wife with their daughter while Will played with blocks on the floor nearby, and felt a contentment so complete it bordered on pain. This was his life now. This family, this ranch, this woman who had changed everything. Sometimes he still thought about the night he found her crying in the snow, how close he had come to missing her completely. If he had stayed home that night, if he had been delayed by even a few minutes, she might have frozen to death before he found her. "What are you thinking about?" Louisa asked, noticing his expression. "About how lucky I am. About how finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. Finding me, or finding me crying in the snow specifically?" She was teasing now, her eyes bright. "Both, all of it. Every moment that led to this one." Years continued to pass, marked by the growth of their children and the expansion of their ranch. Will proved to be a natural with horses and cattle, showing an affinity for the work that made Franklin proud. Grace did indeed prove to be a reader and a thinker, more interested in books and questions than in physical labor, though she helped willingly when needed. When Will was 10 and Grace was 7, Louisa became pregnant once more, a surprise that left both parents stunned. They had thought their family was complete, but the arrival of another son, whom they named Thomas after Louisa's father, brought new energy to the household. Thomas was a cheerful, adventurous child who kept all of them on their toes. "3 children," Louisa said one evening after finally getting Thomas to sleep. "When I was living with my sister, I could not imagine having even one. Now I cannot imagine life without any of them." "They are a lot of work," Franklin admitted, "but they are worth it." "Just like you were worth the risk." "Was I a risk?" She settled beside him on the porch, where they often sat after the children were asleep. "The biggest I ever took. Marrying someone I had known for less than a week, building a life with someone from a completely different world. It could have been a disaster, but it was not. But it was not," he agreed. It was the best decision I ever made. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Franklin thought about the passage of time, how quickly it moved. Will would be old enough to manage significant ranch work soon. Grace was already helping her mother with the household accounts and showing a talent for numbers that suggested she might want more education than the local school could provide. Thomas was still young enough to be molded to find his own path. "I want Grace to have opportunities," Louisa said, echoing his thoughts. "If she wants to go to a real school, get a proper education, I want her to be able to do that. Then we will make it happen. We have the resources now." "The ranch is doing well." Franklin reached for her hand. "I want all our children to have choices, just like you said when Will was born." Life was not without its challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle diseases and financial pressures. There were disagreements and frustrations, moments when the stress of running a ranch and raising a family tested both of them. But through it all, they remained partners, facing every obstacle together. When Will turned 16, he asked his father if he could start managing more of the ranch operations. Franklin agreed, proud of his son's initiative and competence. Will had grown into a strong, capable young man with good judgment and a work ethic that reminded Franklin of his own father. Grace, at 13, announced that she wanted to become a teacher. "Like Mrs. Henderson," she explained. "I want to help children learn and grow, but I need more education first. There is a women's college in Denver that might accept me." Franklin and Louisa discussed it at length. Sending Grace to Denver would be expensive and meant being separated from her for months at a time. But they both knew it was the right thing to do, the fulfillment of the promise they had made to give their children choices. "We will find a way to make it work," Louisa assured Grace. "If teaching is your calling, then you should pursue it." Thomas, at 6, was still too young to know what he wanted, but he showed an interest in everything from ranching to reading to building things with his hands. Franklin suspected he would be the adventurer of the family, the one who might not stay on the ranch but would go out into the wider world. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Franklin surprised Louisa with a trip to Denver. They left the children with the Morrisons, who had become like family over the years, and took the train to the city. It was Louisa's first time back to a major urban center since she had left St. Louis all those years ago. She marveled at the streets and buildings, the electricity and telephones that were becoming common in the city even if they had not yet reached Montrose. But after 3 days, she was ready to go home. "It is too crowded," she confessed as they boarded the train back. "Too loud and too fast." "I have become a country woman, Frank. I would never have believed it 20 years ago, but this is true." "Does that bother you? Do you wish you had chosen differently?" She looked at him like he was crazy. "Not for a single moment. That life in the city, the one my sister wanted for me, it would have killed something essential in my spirit. You saved me, Frank, not just from freezing in the snow, but from a life that was never meant for me." "You saved me too," he said quietly. "I was half alive before you came into my life. You brought color and warmth and meaning to everything." They celebrated their anniversary that night in a fine hotel, but both agreed that their little ranch house was infinitely more romantic than any fancy accommodation. There was something about the life they had built together, the memories soaked into every board and nail, that made it more precious than anything money could buy. The years continued their relentless march forward. Grace did go to college in Denver, and she thrived there, writing long letters home about her studies and her ambitions. Will took over more and more of the ranch management, eventually marrying a local girl named Sarah, who proved to be as hardworking and capable as Louisa herself. They built a small house on the eastern edge of the property, and soon Franklin and Louisa were grandparents to a baby girl named Emma. Thomas, true to Franklin's prediction, left for the wider world at 18, heading to California with plans to try his hand at various trades and adventures. His letters came sporadically, but they were always full of enthusiasm and stories that made Louisa laugh and worry in equal measure. "He will find his way," Franklin assured her. "He has our stubbornness and your spirit. He will be fine." Franklin himself was now in his 50s, his dark hair shot through with gray, his body marked by decades of hard physical labor. But he was healthy and strong, and the ranch was more prosperous than he had ever dared dream. Will was ready to take over completely whenever Franklin was ready to step back, and Grace had returned from college to teach at the Montrose School, living in town but visiting the ranch every weekend. On a cold February evening, exactly 30 years after the night he had found Louisa in the snow, Franklin suggested they take a walk. She looked at him curiously, but agreed, bundling up in the heavy coat he had bought her years ago to replace the inadequate shawl she had been wearing that fateful night. They walked through the snow-covered landscape, their breath forming clouds in the cold air, until they reached the cottonwood tree where he had found her. It was bigger now, its branches thick and gnarled, a silent witness to 3 decades of seasons. "You remember this tree?" Franklin asked. "Of course I remember. It is where my life truly began." Louisa touched the rough bark. "I was so scared that night, so lost and so certain I was going to die, and then you appeared like something out of a story. I almost did not come this way. I almost took the shorter route home. But you did not. You came this way and you found me, and everything changed." She turned to face him, and in the moonlight she was still as beautiful to him as she had been at 23. "Do you ever regret it, taking on a half-frozen stranger and all the complications that came with her?" Franklin pulled her close, his arms encircling her just as they had that night 30 years ago. "Not once, not for a single second of a single day. You have been the greatest adventure of my life, Louisa. Everything good in my world comes from the moment I found you crying in the snow and asked you to come inside. I will keep you warm tonight." Louisa quoted his words from that night, her voice soft with memory. "That was what you said. Such a simple promise, but you have kept it every day since. And I will keep it until I cannot anymore." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is my promise, and I have never broken it." They stood together under the cottonwood tree, 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. The wind howled around them, just as it had that night 3 decades ago, but they were warm in each other's arms, protected by a love that had weathered every storm. The years that followed were quieter, a gentle descent into the comfortable rhythms of older age. Franklin did step back from the day-to-day ranch operations, letting Will take the lead while he served as advisor, an occasional extra hand. Louisa spent her time between helping with the grandchildren, maintaining an impressive garden, and finally having time to read all the books she had always wanted to read. Thomas returned from California at 30, surprising everyone by bringing a wife and announcing his intention to start a horse breeding operation on a portion of the ranch land. Franklin and Will agreed readily, and soon there was a 3rd household on the property, a growing family compound that felt both expansive and intimate. Grace married a fellow teacher, a kind man who loved her intelligence and shared her passion for education. They had 2 children, both of whom showed early signs of inheriting their mother's love of learning. The family gatherings grew larger and louder, filled with grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, all of them carrying forward the legacy that Franklin and Louisa had built together. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Will had arranged for a photographer to come from Grand Junction, and they all posed for a formal portrait, 3 generations standing together on the porch of the house that Franklin had built with his own hands. Franklin looked at all the faces, all the lives that stemmed from that one night in the snow, and felt humbled by the magnitude of what love could create. That night, after the guests had departed and the house was quiet, Franklin and Louisa sat together by the fire as they had done thousands of times before. They were both old now, their bodies marked by time and labor, but their hands still fit together perfectly. 50 years, Louisa mused. It seemed like forever when we were young, but it passed so quickly. Would you do it all again, knowing everything that would happen, every joy and every hardship, in a heartbeat? She smiled at him, her green eyes still bright despite the wrinkles around them. You promised me you would keep me warm that night. You have kept me warm for 50 years, Frank. You have kept my heart warm, my spirit warm, my whole life warm. How could I not do it all again? Franklin felt tears prick his eyes, something that happened more easily in old age. I love you, Louisa Frost. I will love you beyond this life and into whatever comes next. And I love you, forever and always. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers, and Franklin thought about destiny and chance. He had not been looking for love that night in the blizzard. He had just been a lonely cowboy checking his fence line. But sometimes the universe conspired to bring people together, to create connections that defied logic and expectation. He had found a woman crying in the snow. He had offered her shelter and warmth. And from that simple act of kindness had grown a love story that spanned 5 decades and created a legacy of family and land and shared dreams. As they finally rose to go to bed, Franklin took one last look around the room at the life they had built together. The furniture they had chosen, the rugs Louisa had braided, the photographs of children and grandchildren covering the walls. Every object told a story. Every corner held a memory. Come on, Louisa said, tugging his hand. Let us go to bed. I want to fall asleep in your arms, just like I have every night for 50 years. And just like I hope to every night for however many years we have left, Franklin replied. They walked together to the bedroom, 2 people who had started as strangers and become one soul in 2 bodies. Outside, snow began to fall, gentle and soft, covering the world in white. But inside the ranch house, warmth and love kept the cold at bay, just as they had for half a century. Franklin Frost had made many decisions in his 73 years, but asking Louisa Carter to come inside that snowy February night in 1878 was undoubtedly the best. From that one act of compassion had bloomed a love that transformed both their lives, a partnership that created a family, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. As he drifted off to sleep with Louisa in his arms, Franklin offered a silent prayer of gratitude. For the blizzard that brought her to him, for the courage she showed in choosing an uncertain future over a comfortable lie, for every day they had been given together, for the life they had built from nothing but love and determination. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the ranch in peaceful silence. And in the bedroom of the house Franklin had built with his own hands, 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely way slept peacefully, their hearts beating in unison, their love as strong at the end as it had been at the beginning. It was a love story for the ages, born in the snow and tempered by the challenges of frontier life, a testament to the power of kindness and the courage to choose happiness over obligation. And though neither Franklin nor Louisa knew it, their story would be passed down through generations, inspiring their descendants to believe in the possibility of unexpected love and the importance of choosing a life that honored their true selves. The ranch would remain in the family for over 100 years, a physical reminder of what two people could build when they found each other at exactly the right moment. And every February, when the snow fell heavy over Montrose, Colorado, someone in the family would tell the story of how it all began, of the woman crying in the snow and the cowboy who said, "Come inside. I will keep you warm tonight." And they did keep each other warm, for 53 years in total, until Franklin passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76, with Louisa holding his hand. She followed him 3 years later, and they were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked by simple stones that bore their names and a single phrase: "Together forever, from the snow to the stars." Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would stand at those graves and remember the love that started it all, the courage it took to build a life in the wilderness, the tenderness that sustained them through every challenge. And they would resolve to carry forward that legacy of love, to honor the memory of Franklin and Louisa by living fully and loving deeply, just as their ancestors had done. The story of the cowboy and the woman in the snow became legend in Montrose, told and retold until the details took on an almost mythical quality. But those who knew the truth, who had witnessed the quiet devotion and steadfast partnership that defined Franklin and Louisa's marriage, knew that no embellishment was needed. The reality of their love was more powerful than any fiction. In the end, that is what mattered most. Not the hardships they faced or the obstacles they overcame, but the simple fact that they chose each other every single day for over 50 years. They chose love over convenience, partnership over convention, authentic happiness over hollow respectability. And from that choice, from that one snowy night in 1878, when a lonely cowboy found a crying woman and offered her shelter, came a legacy of love that would endure for generations. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important moments in life come when we least expect them, that kindness can change everything, and that true love, once found, can weather any storm. The blizzard that brought them together was fierce and deadly, but the warmth they created together was fiercer still, burning bright through 5 decades and beyond, a light that guided their family through generations and reminded them all of what was possible when two hearts recognized each other and refused to let go.